don't remember meeting Joe, but I know where I imagine I met Joe. Um, just his friend Kenward Elmsley, the poet, would have parties that I first went to in 1971. I was a student at Columbia, and these were basically Frank O'Hara parties, except that Frank O'Hara had died 5 years earlier. But it was other than his absence, it was everyone from the 50s and 60s kind of poetry world and art world. And Joe always never really changed his appearance. Supposedly someone had told him, and I think he told me, that he looked great with a white shirt buttoned open down to the belly button. So he would invariably be wearing this white shirt opened, and his kind of tall curly hair with these big glasses. So that was my sort of first kind of impressions of Joe Brainard. And also in that period, he was almost, it's sort of a dicey word at the moment, but a kind of celebrity in New York, which he withdrew from being as time went on. But he's having shows at the Fishback, and he was a poet. So he was very much a presence. I remember him that way. Then I didn't really get to know him, though, until a few years later when I started to work for him. I think I came to work for Joe. Well, I don't remember the order. I worked for then Kenward Elmsley for a while, typing up librettos and things. None of these jobs lasted very long, and then Joe decided I could come work for him. And my job, he was making these very busy, very complex, very beautiful, very Baroque collages at the time. And he would go out into the streets. He had a loft on Green Street, and he would go around and find all this detritus that attracted him for different reasons and bring it back to his loft. And this was the raw material of these collages. So actually, when I went there, the entire floor of the loft was covered with playing cards and with red lacy fabric and with parakeet decals, and I remember my first job was to go around and find all of the pieces of paper or any object that was this certain shade of kind of red robin red. And Joe was also, this is a period when he was taking a lot of speed. So the kind of obsessive compulsiveness of his art was partly a reflection of that period. And I would go around one day and look, try to match his obsessiveness and look for this one shade of red, and then it would switch to something else the next day. But he was writer as well as artist and collagist. So he was also doing a book of poems at the time. And another of my jobs then was to type up Joe's poems, which usually didn't look like poems, that were often in paragraphs. And then I didn't do a very good job, and I got a postcard, I remember, from Joe in the mail saying, "You're a lousy typist, you're fired, do you want to have dinner Thursday, love, Joe." And that was the end of the professional part of our relationship. But anyway, that was a very Joe kind of way to proceed, and then our relationship became a lot about these dinners. To Duff's, this restaurant on Christopher Street at the time was kind of a gay restaurant. We didn't really have gay restaurants, but in retrospect, that's sort of what it was. And before going, we would always get stoned, I recall. The problem then became that I didn't talk that much anyway, and being stoned magnified my silence. Joe also didn't really, and he stuttered a lot. So we would have these wonderful dinners where there could be 15 minutes of silence going on. Also, I was very interested in the time in medieval theology and Thomas Aquinas, which I would talk about with Joe. And then he told this other friend of mine, J.J. Mitchell, that he thought that my religion stuff was horse shit, which is a very Joe thing. Meanwhile, Joe is sort of the purest, kindest presence in a way, but very, at the same time, simple, edgy. And what I remember his issue being then were that these collages and these millions of pieces of paper and things seem to be require taking speed as fuel in a way. And so one of his conflicts was then he would go with Kenward Elmsley to Vermont for the summer. He would basically dry out. He would basically then try to do painting and drawing, and then would get drawn back into this devil's bargain of the great beauty of the collages in a way. That period then, I remember Joe's loft very much as a kind of Joseph Cornell box that exploded and had all this little bits of everything all over the place. I also remember it, which when I talk about conflict, is being completely empty. So he went through periods and later in life increasingly where he would say that he wasn't making art and he had stopped doing the collages and he was reading big 19th century novels and had this ambition of being a kind of realist oil painter in a way. And he seemed to, for all of his kindness and wisdom, seemed to actually sort of have an identity issue about crazy collages versus oil paintings of whippets and poems that didn't look like poems versus these 19th century novels. So he would also say that he was also wanting to write a kind of classical novel, he would claim in a way. So all this was part of the sort of mystery riddle of Joe. Also, I would get, which wasn't Joe exactly, but when Joe would go to Vermont for the summers, and that was part of the funny rhythm of Joe's life, that he would disappear for the summer, and then he would be back, and he would be with Kenward Elmsley the whole time. He would come back in October, and the two of them would not really see each other and would lead their separate lives. And so you saw Joe in this kind of 6-month period every year. It was seasonal in that way. But in the summers he would write these letters, and my main now connection to Joe and memory and things are these letters that I would get from him. Again, it wasn't your typical letter, because you would go down to the mailbox and he'd have it would be, written out name and address in pencil on a regular envelope with some exotic, of course, commemorative stamp, but it was stuffed, the envelope, and the actual writing part would be a page or two, and then you would have all of these sort of cutouts that Joe had done, little underwear things, little drawings, messages. And so it was really, we think of Ray Johnson, say, as the found artist, but Joe loved that kind of stuff. This finding and making these little letters, which then exploded like moon rocks and became this little piece of art. But again, when I was talking about Joe's simplicity, that they really were just for you in that way. Frank O'Hara had a manifesto called Personism about making poems as if you were talking to someone on the telephone. And Joe increasingly made art that way, and increasingly these letters and full of these little cartoons and cutouts that he had made and discovered were definitely just a kind of one-on-one, intimate throwaway. And so I think that's what was so great about him. The risk, in a way, and simplicity of increasingly just throwing his talent away, or he maybe was thinking of it as the opposite, which is that he was most interested in his friendships and in a kind of one-on-one, intimate relationship rather than galleries and publishers and things. So all that always made me happy, made me feel that my own life was more ordinary and bourgeois than his was. So certainly receiving those letters and that connection, which was half of my connection with Joe finally, was epistolary that way. I think what I miss about Joe in my life is not just Joe, but a world that we were part of. But especially this part of friendship being the most important thing, and that being with someone and going out to dinner was so exciting, and that making art and poetry was so exciting, and the kind of non-careerist aspect of Joe, since I've gotten older, and also Manhattan and New York City is so almost devoid of that. I mean, we've, as a culture, gone much more towards packaging, towards celebrity, towards making money off of art, and so what I miss is that kind of simplicity and adolescent lightness and sort of refusal in a funny way. I mean, Joe's a very easy person, but at the same time, he was refusing to buy into a kind of gallery publication system that I've bought into. I mean, I think Manhattan is based on buying into. So I miss him, and in missing him, you can't help but miss then other people who were one degree of separation from Joe and therefore from me. So he's like the postage stamp for a whole world in my mind. This is later. So this is 1988 when I was writing for Vanity Fair magazine. And he wrote, "Dear Brad, oh boy, so glad to gather via Vanity Fair that you're probably going to be rich and famous overnight. Enjoy it, love, Joe. P.S. Help, is Hermes back? See you in the fall, I hope." Oh, I forgot about all that. Hermes was this Spanish woman who gave like facials basically in her house, who I discovered through a friend of mine. And then Joe started going to see her, and he loved her, and she loved him. And unlike me, so Joe then started going almost every week to see Hermes, and she would sort of hold it over me, because I would come in, and then she would say, "Oh, Joe has such beautiful skin," and Joe does all of the creams and the ointments, and Joe comes every week. So he was sort of the perfect student for Hermes. But the so all those kind of when I'm saying Joe wasn't pretentious, all those little kind of human connections were always a great pleasure to him. These letters then from him would be, see, they're written on these yellow legal-sized pages, and they would be, this is 9 pages long. So Oh yeah, because I also did then. This was after I was fired by him as his typist and gallery assistant or studio assistant. Then my default job became. Then he was doing these sketches, so I was like art model. So I noticed it says here, I hope you don't get a job so you can do some modeling for me still this fall. I think I would be comfortable enough with you, and that's important. Though I wouldn't advise you to believe any of that impersonal stuff for a moment, nude as object, etc. My vision is monumental but personal as hell. Another tall order. So there you have Joe's mind, like at work, and taking something very simple, but obviously having, you can tell that he's thinking about everything in a profound way, right?